All right, guys, good afternoon. Welcome to Little Lunch Lectures. Friday, I don't even know what day it is. Friday, August the 21st. Good gracious. For those of you who do not know me and I do not know you, my name is Stephanie Borrett. I'm the Director of Donor Relations at the Coastal Land Trust. I'm super glad you came today to hear this talk. First, a few announcements. We are recording and we are on Facebook Live. Feel free to turn your video off if you want to, or stay on because we do love to look at faces, so makes it feel like a real audience. There will be a couple links in the chat throughout the talk pertaining to what we're kind of talking about, and sign up for e-news if you'd like to stay in touch with us. So just kind of keep your eyes on the chat, or if you have a question, you can feel free to post it in the chat, or you can keep your microphone on mute for the talk. And then at the end, you can unmute and ask a question. So that'll work too. Our speaker today is Marissa Blackburn, Senior Educator at Bald Head Island Conservancy. Marissa graduated from UNCW with a BS in Marine Biology, and then spent 5 years working at the North Carolina Aquarium at Fort Fisher as an educator. Today, she will share with us how we can help protect Diamondback Terrapin in North Carolina salt marshes. Marissa, thanks so much for sharing your time and your experience with us today. We're super glad to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to chat with you guys today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, all good? All right, so thanks for that introduction. Like Stephanie said, I am the Senior Educator at the Bald Head Island Conservancy. And today I'm going to be talking with you guys all about Diamondback Terrapins in North Carolina salt marshes. So I'm going to start by giving you guys a little bit of an overview on salt marshes and some of the resident species that you can find there, including blue crabs and Diamondback terrapins. Then we're going to discuss some of the conservation issues these species face, some solutions, and then next steps and how to help, how you guys can get involved as well. So starting off with a brief background on this ecosystem and these animals. Our salt marshes in North Carolina are going to be areas that are flooded daily and flooded and drained by tides. So they're going to be located on the coast, they're going to be wetlands, and they're going to be brackish water ecosystems where our freshwater rivers meet the salty ocean water. Those waters mix and create that brackish water ecosystem. They're found on every coast in the US, including all up and down the coast of North Carolina. And these ecosystems are an incredibly important area for a lot of the food that we like to eat, a lot of the seafood species. So about 75% of the seafood that we eat is going to spend some or all of its life in salt marshes. That includes blue crabs, shrimp, and many different species of fin fish. It's a great nursery habitat for juvenile fish because there aren't a whole lot of really large predators in these areas. So sometimes fish might just spend their first few years in the marsh and then head out to the ocean, or sometimes they're going to spend their entire life in the salt marsh. But really important for us for our food and therefore for our economy. Our marshes are also really important because they provide a lot of protection to the coast and prevent erosion. They're able to trap sediment and build up land so that when big hurricanes come through, we are protected. And they also can prevent erosion from happening in that way too. They kind of act like large sponges, so they'll absorb excess rainwater and storm surge and flooding. So they're really important ecosystems in that regard as well. So this is a map of New Hanover and Brunswick counties. I think some of you guys are joining us from this area today. And Bald Head Island is down there all the way in the south where that little star is. So if you haven't been to Bald Head, it's about as far south and east in the state that you can get. And we are going to zoom in here on this map. Let's get a closer view of Bald Head Island. And so that little star there on the bottom right is where the Conservancy is located on the eastern side of the island. And to the north, you can see in this map, all of that kind of greenish gray area is salt marsh. So the Bald Head Island State Natural Area and Zeke's Island is going to be all salt marsh area. And that's going to be places where our Diamondback Terrapins and our blue crabs live, which we're going to talk about here. So our Atlantic blue crabs are a really important food source and therefore important for our economy. They are historically one of North Carolina's most valuable commercial fisheries. So each year on average, harvest is about 27 million pounds. That brings in about $26 million to our state. So very, very important for our local economy. Most crabs are harvested May through October, so late spring through early fall. However, they are harvested year round, but a majority is going to be kind of in those summer months. And crab pots are going to be the most common device used to catch crabs. So that crab pot looks similar to this picture right here. It's going to be a metal mesh wire cage, cube shaped, and it's going to have several entrances for the crabs to go into. So right here and right here, and those are going to be shaped like a funnel. So those crabs are going to go in, there's going to be bait in the bait pot in the middle, they're going to be attracted to that bait, they're going to get in, and then they're going to be stuck because of that funnel shape. It won't be able to get out. There are a couple things on the crab pot, like this little coal ring, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, but that's a way that any small crabs can escape. So if they're not within regulation size, that crab is usually attached to a buoy that's going to go up and float on the surface so that fishermen can locate their pots after they have set them. And another resident of the salt marsh is the Diamondback Terrapin. Our Diamondback Terrapins are the only turtle species in the US that's known to exclusively live in brackish water habitats. So no other species of turtle likes brackish water like the salt marsh has. They're either going to be sea turtles living in the ocean or freshwater turtles living in ponds and rivers. But our Diamondback Terrapins are special in that they like this brackish water habitat. They do have a relatively small home range. So they're not migratory. They're not going to be traveling long distances. They're on average going to be staying in a home range of about 1 mile. It can be a little more than that, but on average, not going to be traveling a lot. And these Diamondback Terrapins are considered a vulnerable species according to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, or IUCN. And that designation actually changed in 2018 to vulnerable from near threatened, which is vulnerable as a higher risk category. So they've changed recently to be vulnerable. And then in North Carolina, they are also considered a species of special concern, although that does not that designation does not afford them any specific protections. They are just listed as a species of special concern in North Carolina. So it's kind of a background on the ecosystem and some of the animals that live there. And we're gonna shift and talk about some of the issues that these species face. So Atlantic blue crabs in our state, the fishery is currently considered overfished, with overfishing occurring. So that's the most recent North Carolina stock assessment. And those two things mean slightly different things. So overfished means that the population size is too small. And overfishing means that we are taking crabs too quickly. So the rate of the stock is being fished is too quick. So two slightly different meanings there. And so a reduction in the harvest is needed in order to achieve a sustainable harvest level that we can maintain year after year. To end overfishing, so to decrease the rate at which they are being caught. And then to recover from that overfish status, hopefully within 10 years, and that would mean increased population sizes overall. So our Diamondback Terrapins kind of have their own unique conservation issues that are tied very much with our blue crab fishery. For Diamondback Terrapins, one of their largest threats is that they are caught as incidental bycatch in blue crab pots. So that means they are not intended to be caught in those pots, but they are attracted to the same types of bait that the blue crabs would be attracted to, mullet and other fish that's put in the bait area of the crab pot. They're going to crawl into those entryways, and just like the crab pots get stuck, or the crabs get stuck, our Diamondback Terrapins can get stuck in those crab pots as well. Now, the issue for the Diamondback Terrapins is that they are air breathers. So all of our turtles breathe air. They have lungs, just like you and me. So they do have to go up to the surface to breathe. And so if they get stuck in a crab pot and they're not able to surface, then they can drown in these crab pots. And so that's been a big issue, and one of the largest reasons for Diamondback terrapin mortality is getting stuck in these crab pots. On Bald Head Island, we've also been seeing Diamondback terrapins that wash up on our beaches, usually in the West Beach area, which is the beach that is adjacent to the Cape Fear River, where the river meets the Atlantic Ocean. And so we keep track of this. We will make a note, but right now it is fairly informal. So if somebody's walking the beach and they see a turtle, they'll give us a call to our wildlife hotline, and then we'll go and check it out and take photos. But we do have dead terrapins washing up on our beaches. And we don't know the cause of mortality for these terrapins. We don't know if they might be discarded bycatch from crab pots, or if there's some other reason why Diamondback terrapins are washing up on our beaches. So we just aren't quite sure the cause for mortality for them. So some solutions have been addressed to, I guess, address some of these issues over the past few years, and this year specifically. So the Atlantic blue crab fishery is managed. There are certain rules and regulations on how many you can catch and how you can catch crabs, especially with the use of crab pots. So briefly, there is a 5-inch size limit for a blue crab, so you're not allowed to keep any crabs that are smaller than that size, and that's to allow that fishery, those crabs to grow up and keep the population healthy. If you're a recreational crabber, you can take 50 crabs per day if you have a fishing license, and if you're over the age of 16, you do need one, and no more than 100 crabs per vessel per day. You're not allowed to harvest any dark sponge crab, so that means a pregnant crab that is carrying eggs. So underneath the bottom of the crab, it's going to look like a sponge. It's going to be orange in color or brown in color, look like a sponge, and that's how they get that name. So no pregnant females are allowed to be harvested in April. 3 coal rings are required on all pots. This picture here on the right is one of those coal rings, like I mentioned earlier. So this coal ring allows small immature crabs to escape from the pot that are under that regulation size of 5 inches. And then closed seasons, depending on where in North Carolina you're crabbing. So if you're in the northern part of the state, north of Highway 58 to Emerald Isle, closed season is the whole month of January. And then south of Highway 58, which is where I am, and probably many of you are in New Hanover, Brunswick counties, that's going to be closed from March 1st to 15th. Some of these regulations are adjusted from what was previously required, and some of these are new. Or some of them are maintained and some of them are new. They've also expanded existing crab spawning sanctuaries. So these are going to be areas where crabbing is not allowed during specific times of the year, and established 14 new crab spawning sanctuaries. One of those crab spawning sanctuaries is in the Lower Cape Fear area, and I'm going to show a map in just a minute. So those areas are closed completely for crabbing from either March 1st through August 31st or March 1st through October 31st. And again, if you remember, that's primarily when crabbing is going to be occurring. It's that May through October timeframe. So that's going to really protect the species and help those populations recover. There are a couple other prohibitions as well on where, when, and how you can catch crabs. And that is all listed on the Division for Marine Fisheries website if you're interested in learning more about that. They also were trying to address any water quality issues that would affect blue crabs and Diamondback terrapins, and essentially all of the animals that live in the salt marsh. The recent new changes also have established these Diamondback Terrapin Management Areas, or DTMAs. So the Marine Fisheries Commission adopted the state's first 2 DTMAs this past May. And these are going to be areas where terrapin excluder devices are going to be required in crab pots. And those terrapin excluder devices are going to prevent terrapins from getting into crab pots and being caught as incidental bycatch. The 2 areas are the Bald Head Island DTMA and the Masonboro Island DTMA. So those are both going to be in the southeastern area of the state. And again, those are the first 2 DTMAs ever created for our state. So that's exciting, an exciting conservation move for the Diamondback Terrapin, especially because, like I mentioned earlier, just because they're listed as a species of special concern does not actually afford them any specific protection. So this is one step in that direction. These 2 areas were chosen based on known populations of Diamondback terrapins. So researchers at various universities have been doing population studies over the years, and also there's been citizen science projects to try to assess population sizes. And Bald Head Island and the natural areas surrounding the island and Masonboro Island were both known places where Diamondback terrapins lived and where there were interactions with Diamondback terrapins and blue crab pots. And those are also areas that are usually a little bit more shallow and a little bit closer to shore. So here's a map of those DTMAs. You can see on the top right is the Masonboro Sound DTMA. And then to the south, we have the Bald Head Island or Lower Cape Fear DTMA. The Masonboro Sound DTMA is about 6,000 acres, and the Lower Cape Fear DTMA is about 10,000 acres. So that's going to be areas where those turtle excluder devices are going to be required on all crab pots moving forward. And on this map, you can also see the crab spawning sanctuary that I mentioned. So that's going to be a place where crabbing will not be allowed from March 1st through October 31st. So that's an area where crabbing is no longer allowed. And that is going to also help out our Diamondback terrapins, because that's not going to be an area that they would potentially have to encounter a crab pot now. So these turtle excluder devices, this is what they, or terrapin excluder devices. Sometimes you'll hear people call them TEDs or TEDs. This is what they look like. They are plastic rectangles made out of plastic or metal, strong plastic or metal. They have a specific size requirement to prevent those turtles from getting in. And in North Carolina, fishermen are going to be required to have these starting in 2021. So the regulation passed this year, but fishermen are going to have a couple months to adjust their fishing gear accordingly. And this coincides with the close season so that they can spend that time modifying the gear that they need to. Here's a picture of that turtle excluder device, terrapin excluder device attached to a crab pot. This one is actually situated vertically, which can further help reduce bycatch, because sometimes small terrapins can fit through. If they're younger and smaller, they can fit through if it's horizontal, but if it's vertical, the terrapins are not going to turn sideways to go in, whereas the crabs can turn sideways to go in. So this is just a way to further reduce bycatch, unintentional bycatch. And then this is another picture up close of the coal ring, which just helps prevent the juvenile crabs from getting trapped in the crab pot. So kind of moving on to our next steps. Here at the Conservancy, we actually are planning to start a terrapin tally project. Masonboro Island already does a terrapin tally project. It is organized through the National Estuarine Research Reserve and the Wildlife Resources Commission. They go out on kayak routes and they count the number of terrapins that they see and crab pots as well. And we at the Conservancy on Bald Head are planning to start a project similar to that as well. And these surveys really help to understand the population status of the Diamondback terrapins, especially if we have data collected year after year. So we can compare our data from 10 years ago and 5 years ago and see how our terrapin populations have changed and also how our crab pot quantities have changed. And in Masonboro, they've noticed increasing quantities of crab pots out on the waters and decreasing populations or decreasing spottings of terrapins. So we're planning to start that here on Bald Head. And the Conservancy is also planning to start documenting terrapin strandings on the beaches in a more formal way. Like I said, we have seen it anecdotally. We've seen terrapins come up, wash up on our beaches, but it's been fairly informal. And so we're formalizing that a little bit more and getting coordinates, GPS coordinates and photos, and just having a better data collection for whenever we get stranded terrapins. And then you also can help support Diamondback terrapin populations as well. So if you fish, making sure you are following fishing regulations is very important, including catch and bag limits. And if you use crab pots, making sure you're using those bycatch reduction devices, those terrapin excluder devices. And primarily you're not allowed to use crab pots off public docks in North Carolina, but if you have a private dock, you can use crab pots there, and you'd want to make sure you're still using those terrapin excluder devices to not accidentally catch those guys. Getting involved in citizen science efforts is always a great way to help and volunteer. Participating in those terrapin tally events and kayaking and counting terrapins and crab pots, those are a lot of times very volunteer. There's a high reliance on volunteers for those types of events, so all the help we can get is appreciated. But even if you don't fish and maybe aren't interested in going kayaking and counting terrapins, if you eat seafood, you can help out our terrapins and our blue crab populations as well. So eating sustainable seafood that's caught in an environmentally responsible way is the biggest thing you can do to help keep our oceans and our populations healthy. So if you're going to the grocery store and you are buying seafood there, you can look for labels on the packaging, which indicates that that seafood is caught in a sustainable way. For farm seafood, that ASC label, that green label is what you want to look for. And if you are getting wild caught seafood, then that blue label, that MSC, Certified Sustainable Seafood label, is what you want to look for. If you don't see those labels on the bag, you might want to look for another bag. And then there's also the Seafood Watch app as well, which is a really great app to use to learn more about what seafood choices are the smartest to make. So if you're going to have crab or shrimp or lobster or a flounder or grouper or any type of fish you are going to have for dinner or going to go purchase at the grocery store, you can search on the app and it will tell you based on your geographic region how that seafood is caught and whether that is a sustainable way to be catching seafood. Unfortunately, right now, North Carolina blue crab fishery is ranked lowest in the rating of sustainability. It's considered a fishery to avoid. However, with the regulations that were put in place this year, hopefully that will change. The main reason it was avoided was because of the high rate of mortality and bycatch of Diamondback terrapins in the blue crab fishery in North Carolina. So if we're able to decrease that, then the blue crab fishery will become much more sustainable. And also just helping to improve local water quality. That was one of the goals for the Marine Fisheries Commission, is to improve local water quality for Diamondback terrapins and for blue crabs. It will help both populations increase. And so for this, stormwater runoff is one of the biggest pollutants in our area. The storm drains that are in the roads, they drain straight to our waterways. They're not getting treated. The only water that gets treated is the water that goes through our pipes in our homes. So, any litter on the roadways is going to be going straight to our waterways, making sure we're not dumping chemicals and things like that. Even washing our cars on the lawn instead of on our driveway helps, so that some of those soaps and chemicals that we might be using can absorb into the grass instead of run straight down into the drain and go into our waterways. So really simple things that we can do in our day-to-day life, and if we all adopted some of those strategies, then we can have a really big impact on protecting the local water quality, the Diamondback terrapins, blue crabs, and all of the other animals that we share our homes with. So that's my presentation for you guys. I'm happy to answer any questions you have at this time. And I also have my email address listed here. If anybody would like to send me follow-up emails. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Marissa. That is awesome. Like you packed a lot into 24 minutes.
Yeah.
That was fantastic, and some of those tips at the end. So as Marissa said, we are open for any questions you might have. Just feel free to take your microphone off of mute and ask it. She will do her best to answer. So I had a question. So I'll start. In the photo of the terrapin that was on the beach with the pen next to it, so is that a typical size of a terrapin, or was that kind of like baby or small or anything?
Yeah, that's a typical size for our terrapins. So they don't get huge.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. Richard, did you have a question?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
You can. Well, on the ones that washed up on the beach dead, is it possible to determine whether they died by drowning or not?
That's a really good question, and I don't know the answer. I'm sure that if we maybe talked with wildlife biologist, they might be able to do that assessment, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Because that might help us determine the cause of death.
Yeah, like a necropsy, which we've done before with other animals. I don't know if anyone on staff at the Conservancy has expertise in that area, although I'm sure somebody would, and that is a good thought. Yeah, we're trying to increase the capacity to kind of assess how those terrapins are dying and why, and see if it is drowning and if it is a bycatch that fishermen are discarding.
Thank you.
Do you know where one would get the TEDs if you were going to use your personal pot on your personal dock?
Yeah, so the Conservancy is actually working on purchasing TEDs that would be specific for Bald Head Island, and plan to have them in our hardware store on the island. I am not sure where else you might be able to get them, maybe tackle bait shops, but you could also make your own as well, as long as it meets that size regulation. There's also some crab pots that if the inside of the funnel is the correct dimensions, then you wouldn't need to add that to your pot. So pot modifications or buying that excluder device are both options, but you don't have to get the device if the funnel is the correct dimension. So there are kind of like DIY options, but I think that's something that we're still trying to figure out the details for, since the regulation went into place in May and they're going to start enforcing next year. So at least here at the Conservancy, we're trying to find a supplier and purchase them and have them easily available on the island. They're not very expensive, so they're cheap, a couple dollars if that. So yeah, we're trying to make them more available.
Cool, very good. Before I announce the next lectures, are there any last questions for Marissa? Okay, thanks again, Marissa. We really, really appreciate your time. This is very, very cool. It's always amazing to hear the things that are happening right in our own backyards that we just might not know about on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you.
Okay, so next week on August 28th, Bill Rainey will be with us. He is one of the founders of both the Society for Mason-Borough Island and the Coastal Land Trust, and he's going to talk to us about that community effort to save one of, in my opinion, the most beautiful places on the North Carolina coast. I think many of you probably also agree. And on September 4th, one of our board members, LeVay Wallace Singleton, will be joining us to give a little lunch lecture about her nonprofit called I'm going to read this, Veterans Employment Base Camp and Organic Garden in New Bern. That would be an opportunity for you to learn how the garden benefits veterans in the program and also helps provide access to fresh, nutritious, and affordable food for community members. And that is a project that is near and dear to the Coastal Land Trust heart as well. So we'll look forward to seeing you guys in the next couple weeks. And if you want to see what else is coming up We have a full calendar all the way through the end of September. So go to coastallandtrust.org/lectures for recordings of past lectures and the full list of what's coming up. So, hey, thanks again for being here. We will see you next week. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Yay. No problem. Thank you for being here.